Rebecca Martinez woke up every morning at 6:30 to the sound of her baby crying. At 24 years old, she had already learned that being a mother meant putting someone else first every single day. She would roll out of bed, walk across the small apartment, and pick up 5-month-old Emma from her crib. The baby would stop crying the moment she felt her mother's warm arms around her. Their apartment was small, but clean. Rebecca had worked hard to make it feel like home. She had painted the living room a soft yellow color and hung pictures of Emma on every wall. The kitchen was tiny, but she kept it organized with everything in its place. Emma's toys were scattered around the living room floor, bright colors that made the space feel alive and happy. David Johnson would usually wake up when he heard Rebecca moving around. He was 26 years old and worked construction jobs around Springfield, Ohio. His hands were rough from years of hard work, but he was always gentle when he held Emma. He had only been living with Rebecca for 4 months, but he loved that little baby like she was his own daughter. Every morning followed the same routine. David would make coffee while Rebecca fed Emma her bottle. They would sit at the small kitchen table together, talking about their plans for the day. David would leave for work at 7:30, kissing both Rebecca and Emma goodbye. Rebecca would get ready for her job at the dental office where she worked as an assistant. Rebecca had been working at Dr. Wilson's dental practice for 2 years. She was good at her job, and the patients liked her. She had a gentle way of talking to people that made them feel comfortable in the dentist chair. The work paid enough for her to afford the apartment and buy everything Emma needed, but there was never much money left over for extras. Dr. Wilson understood that Rebecca was a single mother. Well, she wasn't exactly single anymore, since David moved in, but she still needed flexibility with her schedule. If Emma got sick or had a doctor's appointment, Dr. Wilson would let Rebecca leave early or come in late. This kindness meant everything to Rebecca, who had struggled to balance work and motherhood before David came into their lives. Emma was a beautiful baby with dark hair and big brown eyes like her mother. She was starting to smile more and would laugh when David made funny faces at her. Rebecca loved watching David play with Emma. He would get down on the floor and make silly noises that made the baby giggle. It was clear that David had fallen in love with both of them. The neighborhood where they lived was quiet and safe. Their apartment building was old but well maintained. Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman who lived next door, often commented on what a sweet family they made. She would see David carrying Emma to the car when they went grocery shopping together. She watched Rebecca hurrying to work every morning, always looking neat and professional in her scrubs. Other neighbors noticed them too. The young couple in apartment 3B seemed to have their lives together. They didn't throw loud parties or cause problems. David's truck was always parked in the same spot, and Rebecca's car was reliable transportation that got her to work every day. They looked like any other small family trying to build a good life together. Rebecca had not always been this happy. Before David, she had struggled as a completely single mother. Emma's biological father, Michael Torres, had been out of the picture since Emma was born. The relationship with Michael had been difficult and sometimes scary. Rebecca was relieved when it ended, even though being alone with a new baby was overwhelming. When Rebecca first met David at the grocery store, Emma was only 2 months old. Rebecca was trying to manage a crying baby and a cart full of groceries when David offered to help. He carried her bags to the car and didn't seem bothered by Emma's fussing. Most men Rebecca's age ran away when they found out she had a baby. But David was different. Their first few dates were coffee meetings while Emma slept in her stroller. David would ask questions about the baby and seemed genuinely interested in Rebecca's life as a mother. He never made her feel like Emma was a burden or something that got in the way of their relationship. Instead, he embraced both of them as a package deal. Moving in together had been David's idea. Rebecca's lease was ending and money was tight. David suggested they find a place together where they could share expenses and he could help with Emma. Rebecca was nervous about taking such a big step, but David had proven himself to be reliable and caring. He had never raised his voice or shown any signs of anger, which was important to Rebecca after her experience with Michael. Their life together settled into a comfortable routine. David would come home from work tired and dirty. but he always had energy for Emma. He would take over baby duty so Rebecca could cook dinner or do laundry. They would eat together every night, talking about their days and making plans for the weekend. On weekends, they would take Emma to the park or go shopping for things they needed for the apartment. David was teaching himself how to fix things around the house by watching videos online. He had repaired a leaky faucet and painted Emma's room a soft pink color. Rebecca felt like she finally had a partner who wanted to build something lasting with her. Rebecca's sister Maria lived in the next town over and visited often. She could see how much happier Rebecca was with David. Maria had worried about her sister trying to raise Emma alone, but now she saw Rebecca laughing again and planning for the future. David treated Maria with respect and always asked about her own family. The dental office where Rebecca worked was becoming like a second family to her. Dr. Wilson's wife sometimes brought in baby clothes that their grandchildren had outgrown. The other dental assistants would look at pictures of Emma on Rebecca's phone and comment on how much she was growing. Everyone could see that Rebecca was doing well. Rebecca had even started thinking about the future in ways she hadn't before. Maybe David would propose someday. Maybe they could save enough money to buy a small house with a yard where Emma could play. Maybe Emma would grow up with siblings and have the stable family that Rebecca had always wanted to give her. Everything seemed to be falling into place for Rebecca, David, and Emma. They were building something real together, something that felt permanent and safe. None of them knew that their happiness was about to be threatened by someone from Rebecca's past who wasn't ready to let go. 3 months had passed since David moved in with Rebecca and Emma. Their life had found a steady rhythm that felt safe and predictable. Rebecca was getting ready for work on a Tuesday morning when her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she recognized but hadn't seen in months. Her stomach dropped as she stared at the screen. It was Michael Torres calling. Rebecca let the phone ring until it went to voicemail. She tried to focus on getting Emma ready for daycare, but her hands were shaking slightly as she packed the diaper bag. David noticed something was wrong immediately. He could read Rebecca's moods better than anyone, and right now she looked worried. "Who was that calling so early?" David asked, pouring coffee into his travel mug. Rebecca hesitated. She had told David about Michael when they first started dating, but they rarely talked about Emma's biological father anymore. It was easier to pretend he didn't exist, especially since he had shown no interest in his daughter for months. "It was Michael," she said quietly, not looking at David. David stopped what he was doing. His jaw tightened, but he kept his voice calm. "What did he want?" "I don't know. I didn't answer it," Rebecca replied, bouncing Emma gently as the baby started to fuss. The voicemail notification appeared on Rebecca's phone, but she didn't check it right away. She couldn't deal with whatever Michael had to say, not when she was already running late for work. David kissed her goodbye as usual, but she could see the concern in his eyes. At work, Rebecca finally listened to the voicemail during her lunch break. Michael's voice sounded different than she remembered. Less angry, more pleading. He said he had been thinking about Emma and wanted to see her. He claimed he had been working on himself and was ready to be a father. He asked Rebecca to call him back. Rebecca stared at her phone for a long time after the message ended. Part of her felt guilty for keeping Emma away from her biological father, but she also remembered why their relationship had ended. Michael had a temper that scared her. He would yell and throw things when he got angry. He had never hit her, but she had always worried he might. When Rebecca got home that evening, David was already there playing with Emma on the living room floor. The sight of them together usually made her happy, but tonight she felt torn. Emma was laughing at David's silly faces, reaching her little hands toward him. To Emma, David was her father in every way that mattered. He left a voicemail. "Rebecca," said, sitting down on the couch. David looked up from where he was lying on the floor with Emma crawling on his back. "What did he say?" Rebecca told him about Michael wanting to see Emma and claiming he had changed. David's expression grew serious as he listened. He sat up, gently placing Emma in her bouncy seat. "Do you believe him?" David asked. Rebecca didn't know what to believe. Michael had always been good at saying the right things when he wanted something. But people could change, couldn't they? Maybe he really did want to be a better person and a real father to Emma. I think I should at least talk to him, Rebecca said. Emma deserves to know her biological father if he's really changed. David nodded, but Rebecca could see he wasn't happy about it. I understand, he said, but I want you to be careful. And if he gives you any trouble at all, you tell me. Rebecca called Michael back the next day. They talked for 20 minutes, and he did sound different. He told her he had been going to anger management classes and seeing a counselor. He had a steady job now working at an auto repair shop. He said he thought about Emma every day and regretted not being there for her. I know I messed up, Michael said, but I want to make it right. I want to be part of her life. Rebecca agreed to meet him at a coffee shop to talk more. She didn't tell David about the meeting until after it happened, which was the first time. She had kept something from him since they moved in together. The coffee shop meeting was awkward but not hostile. Michael looked older, more tired than Rebecca remembered. He showed her pictures on his phone of the apartment where he lived now. It was small, but clean. He had bought a crib and some toys, he said, hoping that someday Emma could stay with him. I know you're with someone new, Michael said. And I'm not trying to cause problems with that, I just want to see my daughter. Rebecca studied his face, looking for signs of the anger she remembered. He seemed calmer, more controlled. But she had seen him act this way before, especially when he wanted something. If I let you see her, it would have to be supervised, Rebecca said. At least at first. Michael agreed immediately. Whatever you want. I just want the chance to know her. They arranged for Michael to visit the following Saturday afternoon. Rebecca would be there the whole time, and David had reluctantly agreed to make himself scarce for a few hours. He didn't like the idea, but he trusted Rebecca's judgment. The first visit went better than expected. Michael was gentle with Emma, though she seemed confused by the stranger trying to hold her. He brought age-appropriate toys and spent most of the hour just watching her play. He didn't push Rebecca for more time or argue about anything. But David could tell something had changed in their home. Rebecca seemed distracted and worried. She would stare at her phone, waiting for calls or texts from Michael. She started second-guessing decisions about Emma's care, wondering if Michael would approve. You're different since he came back, David said one night after Emma was asleep. Rebecca was folding laundry and didn't look up. I'm just trying to figure out what's best for Emma. What about what's best for us? David asked quietly. Rebecca did look up then, and David could see the confusion and stress in her eyes. She was trying to balance everyone's needs, and it was wearing her down. Michael started calling more often, asking about Emma's daily routine and milestones. He wanted to know when she ate, when she napped, what new sounds she was making. At first, Rebecca thought his interest was sweet, but David worried it was becoming obsessive. The second visit lasted longer, and Michael was more comfortable holding Emma. But afterward, he lingered at the apartment, asking Rebecca questions about her life with David. He wanted to know if she was happy, if David was good to her, if she ever missed what they used to have together. Rebecca told David about these conversations, and she could see the worry growing in his eyes. What had started as a simple request to see his daughter was beginning to feel like something more complicated and potentially dangerous. 2 months had passed since Michael started visiting Emma regularly. What began as supervised visits once a week had grown into phone calls every other day and requests for more time with his daughter. Rebecca found herself caught between two worlds that were pulling her in opposite directions. Michael had been consistent about his visits and seemed genuinely interested in being a father. He never missed an appointment and always brought something for Emma. Sometimes it was toys, sometimes it was baby food or diapers. He would spend the entire visit focused on the baby, talking to her in a soft voice and trying to make her laugh. But David was becoming more uncomfortable with the situation each week. He would leave the apartment when Michael came over, usually going to his friend Jake's house or running errands. When he returned, Rebecca would be quiet and distant. The easy conversations they used to have were becoming harder to find. He's asking too many questions, David said one evening after Michael had left. They were cleaning up Emma's toys from the living room floor. "What kind of questions?" Rebecca asked, though she already knew what David meant. "About us. About our relationship. About our plans," David replied. "Today he asked if we were thinking about getting married." Rebecca stopped picking up blocks and looked at David. "What did you tell him?" "I told him that was none of his business," David said. "But Rebecca, I don't think he's just here for Emma anymore." Rebecca had noticed it too. Michael's questions were becoming more personal. He would ask if she was happy, if David treated her well, if she ever thought about the good times they used to have together. At first she thought he was just making conversation, but now she wondered if there was more to it. The situation became more complicated when Michael started talking about wanting overnight visits with Emma. He said his apartment was ready for a baby and he wanted to experience being a full-time father, even if it was just for one night. "She's only 7 months old," Rebecca told him during one of his visits. "She's never spent a night away from me." "I'm her father," Michael replied, his voice getting slightly sharper. "Don't you think I have the right to have my daughter stay with me?" This was the first time Rebecca had heard that edge in Michael's voice since he came back into their lives. It reminded her of the old Michael, the one who would get angry when he didn't get his way. But the moment passed quickly, and he apologized for sounding harsh. David was strongly against the idea of overnight visits. They argued about it after Emma went to bed, their voices rising higher than usual. "You don't trust him," Rebecca said. "And maybe I don't completely trust him either. But what if he really has changed? What if Emma grows up hating me for keeping her away from her father? What if something happens to her?" David shot back. "What if his temper comes back? What if he can't handle a crying baby in the middle of the night?" These were the same fears Rebecca had, but hearing David say them out loud made her feel like she was being unfair to Michael. He had been nothing but patient and gentle during all his visits. Maybe she was letting her past experiences cloud her judgment about who he was now. The breaking point came during the week before Thanksgiving. Michael had been pushing harder for overnight visits and had even suggested taking Emma for the entire holiday weekend. Rebecca had said no, explaining that she and David already had plans to visit David's family. "So his family is more important than Emma's real father," Michael had said, and there was no mistaking the anger in his voice this time. Rebecca tried to explain that it wasn't about choosing sides, but Michael cut her off. "I've been patient," he said. "I've followed all your rules and done everything you asked, but I have rights too. Emma is my daughter, not his." After that conversation, Rebecca couldn't stop thinking about Michael's words. She talked to her sister Maria about the situation, hoping for guidance. "I think he's trying to get you back," Maria said bluntly. "This isn't just about Emma. He's trying to break up what you have with David." "Maybe," Rebecca admitted. "But what if I'm wrong? What if he really just wants to be a good father and I'm making it harder than it needs to be?" Maria looked at her sister with concern. "Rebecca, you were scared of him before. You told me he had a temper and made you feel unsafe. Has that really changed, or is he just better at hiding it now?" Rebecca didn't have an answer for that question, but it stayed with her for days. She found herself watching Michael more carefully during his visits, looking for signs of the old anger. Sometimes she thought she saw it flash in his eyes when Emma cried, or when she mentioned something about David. But it would disappear so quickly she wondered if she was imagining it. The tension in the apartment was affecting everyone, including Emma. The baby seemed to pick up on the stress and was more fussy than usual. David was working longer hours to avoid being home during Michael's visits. Rebecca was losing weight and having trouble sleeping. Everything came to a head the weekend before Thanksgiving. Michael showed up at the apartment unannounced on Saturday morning, saying he wanted to take Emma to the park. David was home, which made the situation immediately uncomfortable. "You can't just show up here whenever you want," David said, standing between Michael and the door. "I can see my daughter whenever I want," Michael replied, his voice getting louder. "You don't get to decide when I can and can't be here." Rebecca tried to calm both men down, but the situation was escalating quickly. Emma started crying in her crib frightened by the raised voices. Neighbors began looking out their windows as the argument moved to the parking lot. "You need to call first," David said firmly. "This is our home, not yours." "Our home," Michael repeated, getting closer to David. "This should be my home. That should be my family." That's when Rebecca realized Maria had been right. This wasn't about Michael wanting to be a father to Emma. This was about Michael wanting his old life back, wanting to replace David and rebuild what he had lost. And he wasn't going to give up easily. December had brought cold weather to Springfield, and with it came a tension in Rebecca's apartment that seemed to grow thicker each day. The argument between David and Michael in the parking lot had been the final warning sign that everyone chose to ignore. Rebecca knew she had to make a choice, but every option seemed wrong. After the confrontation, David had been quiet for days. He would come home from work and play with Emma, but the easy conversations between him and Rebecca had stopped. She could see the hurt in his eyes every time Michael's name came up. David felt like he was losing the family he loved to a man who had never cared about them before. Michael, on the other hand, had become more persistent. He called Rebecca every day, sometimes twice a day. He would text her pictures of baby clothes he had bought for Emma, or furniture he had added to his apartment. He talked constantly about wanting more time with his daughter, and kept bringing up the idea of overnight visits. "She needs to get used to being with me," Michael would say. "How can we build a relationship if she only sees me for a few hours a week?" Rebecca knew he was right about needing more time to build a relationship with Emma, but she also knew that David was right to be worried. There was something about Michael's intensity that reminded her of the old days, when he would become obsessed with getting his way. The decision was made for her when Michael filed papers with the family court requesting official visitation rights. Rebecca received the legal documents on a Thursday, and when David saw them on the kitchen table, his face went pale. "He's taking us to court," David said, reading through the papers. "He has the right to see his daughter," Rebecca said, but her voice sounded uncertain even to herself. "Rebecca, this man walked away from you when you were pregnant," David replied. "He didn't pay child support. He didn't even call to see if Emma was born healthy. Now he wants to take her away from the only home she's ever known," Rebecca started. Crying then, the stress of the past few months finally overwhelming her. She was trying to do the right thing for everyone, but there was no solution that would make everyone happy. David held her while she cried, and for a moment it felt like they were on the same side again. But the court papers changed everything. Michael's lawyer had advised him to ask for overnight visits immediately, claiming that gradual increases in visitation time were not necessary for a biological father. The judge would likely grant at least some overnight time, especially since Michael could prove he had a stable job and a suitable apartment. Rebecca's lawyer advised her to agree to some overnight visits rather than fight it completely in court. Fighting would be expensive and probably unsuccessful. The court system generally favored biological parents unless there was proof of abuse or neglect. On December 15th, the day that would change everything forever, Rebecca woke up feeling sick to her stomach. Today was the day Michael would take Emma for her first overnight visit. Rebecca had barely slept, worried about how Emma would handle being away from home for so long. David had been against this visit from the beginning. They had argued about it for days, and David had even suggested that Rebecca should ignore the court order and face the consequences later. But Rebecca was afraid of making things worse by defying a judge's decision. "I don't trust him alone with her," David said as they ate breakfast. Emma was in her high chair, playing with pieces of cereal and babbling happily. "It's just one night," Rebecca replied, but she didn't sound convinced. "And if anything goes wrong, I can go get her." "What if something goes wrong and you can't?" David asked. "What if he doesn't answer his phone? What if he decides to leave town with her?" These were the same fears that had been keeping Rebecca awake at night. But the court order was clear. Michael had the right to take Emma from 6 in the evening until 10 the next morning. Rebecca had no choice but to trust that he would bring their daughter back safely. David left for work that morning, after kissing both Rebecca and Emma goodbye. But instead of his usual, "Have a good day," he said, "Call me if you need anything." Rebecca could hear the worry in his voice. The day passed slowly. Rebecca cleaned the apartment twice and packed Emma's overnight bag 3 times, making sure she had everything the baby might need. She included extra diapers, formula bottles, clothes, blankets, and toys. She wrote detailed instructions about Emma's eating and sleeping schedule. At 5:30, Rebecca got a text from Michael saying he was on his way. Her hands started shaking as she read the message. Emma was taking her afternoon nap, and Rebecca almost hoped she wouldn't wake up before Michael arrived. Maybe if Emma was cranky or difficult, Michael would decide to postpone the visit. But Emma woke up happy and alert, smiling at her mother and reaching for her favorite stuffed animal. Rebecca changed her diaper and put her in a warm outfit, trying to act normal even though her heart was racing. David called at 6:15 just as Michael's car was pulling into the parking lot. "He's here," Rebecca said into the phone. "You don't have to do this," David replied. "We can figure something else out." "Yes, I do," Rebecca said. "The court said I have to." "Then I'm coming home," David said. "I don't want you to be alone when he comes to pick her up." "No," Rebecca said quickly. "That will just make things worse. He's already angry that you're in our lives. If you're here when he comes to get Emma, there might be another fight." David was quiet for a moment. "Call me the second he leaves," he said finally. "And call me again before you go to bed. And if anything at all feels wrong, you call the police." Rebecca promised she would, then hung up the phone and went to answer the door. Michael was standing in the hallway holding a car seat, ready to take Emma away for the night. Rebecca's hands were still shaking as she handed her daughter over to her biological father, not knowing that this would be the last time she would ever hold Emma alive. The call came at 2:30 in the morning. Rebecca woke up to her phone ringing, and when she saw it was Michael calling, her first thought was relief. Maybe Emma had been fussy and he was ready to bring her home early. But when she answered, she could barely understand what Michael was saying through his panicked voice. "Something's wrong with Emma," he was saying. "I called an ambulance. We're going to the hospital." Rebecca's blood went cold. "What do you mean something's wrong? What happened?" "She won't wake up," Michael said, and Rebecca could hear sirens in the background. "I tried to wake her up and she won't open her eyes." Rebecca was already getting dressed, her hands shaking so badly she could barely button her shirt. "Which hospital?" she asked. "Springfield General," Michael replied. "Rebecca, I don't know what happened. She was fine when I put her to bed. She was fine." Rebecca called David while she was driving to the hospital. He answered on the first ring, instantly alert despite being woken up. "Emma's in the hospital," she said, crying so hard she could barely speak. "Something's wrong and I don't know what happened." David told her he would meet her there, but Rebecca was already pulling into the hospital parking lot. She ran through the emergency room doors and found Michael sitting in the waiting area with his head in his hands. He looked up when he saw her, and his face was pale and streaked with tears. "Where is she?" Rebecca demanded. "They're working on her," Michael said. "The doctors won't tell me anything yet." Rebecca wanted to grab Michael and shake him until he told her exactly what had happened, but before she could say anything, David came running through the doors. He took one look at Michael and Rebecca could see his jaw tighten with anger. "What did you do to her?" David asked, standing over Michael. "I didn't do anything," Michael replied, looking up at David with red eyes. "She was sleeping and then she just wouldn't wake up." A doctor came out before the situation could escalate further. Dr. Martinez was a woman in her 40s who had been working in emergency medicine for 15 years. She had seen too many cases like this one, and her face was serious as she approached the 3 adults. "Are you Emma's parents?" she asked. "I'm her mother," Rebecca said immediately. "This is Michael, her father, and this is David, my boyfriend." Dr. Martinez looked at the complicated family situation and decided to focus on Rebecca. "I need to speak with you privately," she said. They went into a small room off the main hallway. Rebecca's legs felt weak as she sat down in the chair the doctor indicated. "Emma is in critical condition," Dr. Martinez said gently. "She has suffered severe brain trauma consistent with what we call shaken baby syndrome." Rebecca stared at the doctor, trying to understand what she was hearing. Shaken baby syndrome, she repeated. It happens when someone shakes a baby violently, the doctor explained. The baby's brain moves back and forth inside the skull, causing serious damage. Emma is on life support right now, but I have to tell you that her injuries are very severe. Rebecca felt like the room was spinning. Is she going to be okay? She whispered. Dr. Martinez took Rebecca's hand. We're doing everything we can, but you need to prepare yourself. Injuries like this are often fatal, especially in babies as young as Emma. Rebecca started crying harder than she had ever cried in her life. Dr. Martinez stayed with her for several minutes, explaining that the police would need to be called because Emma's injuries were clearly the result of abuse. When Rebecca came back to the waiting room, David could tell from her face that the news was terrible. Michael was still sitting in the same chair, staring at the floor. She's dying, Rebecca said to David, and he wrapped his arms around her. Detective Lisa Carter arrived at the hospital an hour later. She was a tall woman with graying hair who had been investigating child abuse cases for 10 years. She knew that in cases of shaken baby syndrome, the person who shook the baby was usually the last person who had been alone with the child. Detective Carter interviewed Rebecca first, asking detailed questions about Emma's recent health and behavior. Rebecca told her that Emma had been completely normal when Michael picked her up for the overnight visit. The baby had been happy, alert, and showing no signs of illness or injury. Had Emma ever been shaken before? Detective Carter asked. No, Rebecca said firmly. I would never hurt her, and David would never hurt her. What about Michael? The detective asked. Has he ever shown signs of having a temper around Emma? Rebecca thought about all the visits over the past few months. Michael had always been gentle with Emma during the supervised visits, but Rebecca also remembered the arguments, the intensity, the way his voice would get sharp when he didn't get what he wanted. He used to have a temper when we were together, Rebecca admitted. But he said he had changed. He was going to anger management classes. Detective Carter made notes and then went to interview Michael. She found him in the hospital chapel, sitting alone in the back row. When she introduced herself, Michael started crying again. I loved that little girl, he said. I would never hurt her. I don't know what happened. Detective Carter had heard similar denials many times before. Tell me about last night, she said. Walk me through everything that happened from the time you picked Emma up. Michael's story was that he had taken Emma to his apartment, fed her dinner, played with her for a while, and then put her to bed around 8:30. He said she had been a little fussy, but nothing unusual. He had watched television and gone to bed around 11. When he woke up at 2 a.m. to check on her, she was unresponsive. Did Emma cry during the night? Detective Carter asked. A little bit, Michael admitted. But I thought she would go back to sleep on her own. Did you go into her room when she was crying? Michael hesitated. Maybe once or twice. Just to check on her. Did you pick her up? Another hesitation. I might have. I can't really remember everything clearly. Detective Carter knew that guilty suspects often claimed they couldn't remember details, but she also knew that people in shock sometimes genuinely had trouble recalling events accurately. She would need physical evidence and medical testimony to build a case. The hospital security cameras showed Michael arriving with Emma at 7:15 the previous evening. The baby appeared alert and healthy in the footage. The cameras also showed Michael leaving his apartment building twice during the night, once to throw away garbage and once to get something from his car. But there were no cameras inside his apartment to show what had happened behind closed doors. Emma died 3 days later without ever regaining consciousness. The medical examiner's report confirmed that she had died from injuries consistent with shaken baby syndrome. The trauma had occurred sometime between midnight and 2 a.m. on December 16th. Michael was arrested at Emma's funeral. As the mourners watched in shock, Detective Carter and 2 uniformed officers approached Michael and placed him in handcuffs. Rebecca collapsed in David's arms, overwhelmed by grief and the surreal scene of Emma's father being arrested at their daughter's burial service. The investigation would continue for months, but the evidence was clear. Michael Torres had been the only person with Emma when she suffered the injuries that killed her. Whether it had been a moment of frustration with a crying baby or something more deliberate, he was responsible for the death of his own daughter. The trial of Michael Torres began 8 months after Emma's death. The courthouse in Springfield was packed every day with reporters, family members, and people from the community who had followed the case. Rebecca attended every day of the trial, sitting in the front row behind the prosecutor's table with David beside her holding her hand. Michael had pleaded not guilty to first-degree murder, but his defense attorney knew the case would be difficult to win. The medical evidence was overwhelming. Dr. Sarah Chen, the medical examiner, testified that Emma had suffered the kind of brain trauma that only occurs when a baby is shaken with tremendous force. "These injuries don't happen accidentally," Dr. Chen explained to the jury. "A baby would have to be shaken extremely hard for several seconds to cause this kind of damage. It requires significant force and intent." The prosecutor, District Attorney Robert Walsh, built his case methodically. He showed the jury hospital records proving that Emma had been perfectly healthy before her overnight visit with Michael. He presented testimony from Rebecca and David about Emma's normal behavior and development. He called neighbors who had heard Michael arguing loudly on the phone in the days before Emma's death. Most damaging to Michael's case was his own inconsistent statements to police. In his first interview, he claimed Emma had not cried at all during the night. In his second interview, he admitted she had cried a little bit. By his third interview, he was describing Emma as very fussy and said he had tried everything to calm her down. Detective Carter testified about finding inconsistencies in Michael's apartment. Despite his claims that Emma had slept peacefully, most of the night her blankets and sheets were twisted and disheveled in a way that suggested distress. A bottle that should have been empty if Michael had fed Emma properly still contained formula. "Mr. Torres told us he was an experienced father who knew how to care for babies," Detective Carter told the jury. But the physical evidence in that apartment told a different story. Michael's defense attorney argued that Emma's injuries could have been caused by an accident, such as falling from her crib or being dropped. But Dr. Chen's testimony made it clear that accidental falls do not cause the specific pattern of brain trauma that killed Emma. The defense also tried to suggest that Emma might have been injured before the overnight visit, during one of the supervised visits when Rebecca was present. But medical testimony established that the injuries had occurred within hours of Emma's death, making Michael the only possible suspect. On the fourth day of the trial, something unexpected happened. Michael's attorney asked for a recess to speak privately with his client. When court resumed an hour later, Michael stood up and told the judge he wanted to change his plea. "I plead guilty to second-degree murder," Michael said, his voice barely above a whisper. The courtroom erupted. Rebecca started crying and had to be comforted by David. Michael's family members gasped and some started crying as well. The judge had to bang his gavel several times to restore order. In exchange for his guilty plea, Michael would receive a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole instead of facing the death penalty. He would also have to give a full confession, describing exactly what had happened the night Emma died. Michael's confession was read in court the following week. He admitted that Emma had been crying inconsolably for hours on the night of December 15th. He had tried feeding her, changing her diaper, and walking around the apartment with her, but nothing worked. Around 1:30 in the morning, he had become frustrated and angry. "I just wanted her to stop crying," Michael said in his confession. "I picked her up and shook her, trying to get her to be quiet. I didn't mean to hurt her. I just wanted the crying to stop." Michael described immediately knowing that something was wrong. Emma had gone limp in his arms and her breathing had changed. He had tried to wake her up, but she wouldn't respond. Instead of calling for help immediately, he had spent nearly an hour trying to revive Emma on his own before finally calling 911. "I was scared," he said. "I knew I had done something terrible and I was scared." The confession brought some closure to Rebecca, but it also brought new pain. Learning the details of Emma's last moments was almost unbearable. She had trusted Michael with their daughter, and he had killed her in a moment of selfish frustration. Michael was sentenced to life in prison without parole on a cold February morning. Before the sentence was imposed, Rebecca was allowed to give a victim impact statement. She walked to the podium on shaky legs, carrying a framed picture of Emma. "Emma was 7 months old when you killed her," Rebecca said, looking directly at Michael. "She was just starting to crawl. She was learning to say mama. She would clap her hands when she was happy and laugh when anyone smiled at her." Rebecca's voice broke as she continued. "You robbed her of her entire life because you couldn't handle a few hours of crying. You robbed me of watching her grow up, of seeing her first steps, of hearing her first words. You destroyed our family because you were selfish and weak." Michael cried as Rebecca spoke, but she felt no sympathy for him. "I hope you think about what you did every single day for the rest of your life," she said before returning to her seat. The aftermath of Emma's death and Michael's conviction was devastating for everyone involved. Rebecca fell into a deep depression and had to take several months off work. She and David tried to maintain their relationship, but the trauma had changed both of them in ways that made it difficult to connect. David blamed himself for not being more protective of Emma. He wondered if he should have refused to let Michael take her for the overnight visit, even if it meant defying the court order. The guilt consumed him and affected his ability to sleep and work. Rebecca blamed herself for allowing Michael back into their lives at all. She wondered if she had been naive to believe he had changed, if she should have seen the warning signs, if she could have prevented Emma's death by making different choices. Their relationship ended 6 months after the trial concluded. They both knew they loved each other, but they couldn't look at each other without thinking about Emma and the night they lost her. David moved to another state to start over, while Rebecca stayed in Springfield but moved to a different apartment. Rebecca eventually returned to work at the dental office, where her colleagues were supportive and understanding. Dr. Wilson allowed her to work reduced hours while she continued therapy. Slowly, very slowly, Rebecca began to rebuild her life. She started speaking at family court hearings about the importance of thorough background checks and psychological evaluations in custody cases. She wanted other mothers to learn from her tragedy and be more cautious about trusting people with their children. "I thought I was doing the right thing by giving Emma's father a chance," Rebecca would tell other parents, "but I should have trusted my instincts. I should have protected her better." 3 years after Emma's death, Rebecca met someone new. James was a teacher who had never been married and had no children of his own. He was patient with Rebecca's grief and understood that Emma would always be part of her life. They married 2 years later in a small ceremony, attended only by close family. Rebecca and James eventually had 2 children together, a boy and a girl. Rebecca was an overprotective mother who struggled with anxiety about her children's safety, but she was determined to give them the love and security that Emma never got to experience. She keeps Emma's picture in every room of their house and talks to her living children about the sister they never met. Every year on Emma's birthday, the family releases balloons into the sky and Rebecca tells stories about the 7 months she had with her first daughter. Michael remains in prison, where he will stay for the rest of his life. He has written letters to Rebecca asking for forgiveness, but she has never responded. She believes that some actions are unforgivable and that the best way to honor Emma's memory is to focus on protecting and nurturing the children who are still alive. The case changed how family courts in Ohio handle custody disputes involving domestic violence histories. Emma's law now requires mandatory anger management evaluation for any parent seeking custody who has a history of violence or aggression, even if no formal charges were ever filed. Rebecca hopes that Emma's death was not completely meaningless, if it helps protect other children from similar tragedies. But she would give anything to have her daughter back, to see her grow up, to hear her voice just one more time. Some wounds never heal completely, and some losses can never be replaced.